Hi, my name is Dimitri and I'm the developer of InfraNodus, a visual AI text analysis tool. In this video, I will walk you through the InfraNodus interface so you can see how you can use it for your objectives. I will also explain how InfraNodus works and show you what are the different features that you can use from network analysis in order to get some really interesting insights about any text, especially how you can identify the blind spots that everyone else is missing, find which topics could be better connected, and then use the built-in AI to generate interesting research questions or ideas that would bridge those gaps and therefore make you connect the existing topics in any text in a new way, and that usually leads to very interesting discoveries. So keep watching if you want to learn how that works. First, I will just walk you through the interface. So InfraNodus gets any text, which can be a text that you have, can be a PDF document, a spreadsheet. In this case, it's actually tweets from Jan LeCun, who is a known AI researcher working at Meta. And these are, I think, his last 400 tweets that were made 2 weeks ago. That was when he stopped using Twitter. And you can see those tweets on the left. So this is the text that he uses to write the tweets. And then the actual content is here on the right. It's represented as a graph. And on that graph, the words are represented as the nodes and the co-occurrences are the connections. This very simple way of representing text allows you to get a lot of structural information, because once you represent it as a graph, where the words are the nodes and the co-occurrences are the connections, you can then align them on a two-dimensional plane like we do here by putting the nodes that are connected closer to each other and by pushing the most connected nodes apart. This kind of layout is called force atlas layout. It's very typical when you visualize social networks, for instance, because it gives you a really good structural understanding of content. And you can see very, very quickly that, for example, he's talking a lot about AI, OpenAI, Meta here, models. So it's quite technical stuff on AI. And by the way, here you can see in the analytics panel on the right, you see the actual, here if you click on analytics, you can see this, you see the main topical clusters identified. So you can see that he's talking about AI stuff. And then another big topic for him are the Trump policies. So this is how the graph works. It represents ideas as a network, the more influential ones that have the highest between centrality because they connect different topics together. They will be bigger on the graph, so you can quickly see what are the more important concepts, more influential in this discourse. We also call them the crossroads for meaning circulation, because they will appear most often between different topics that exist in this text, right? So we see that he's talking about AI models and so on. And then Trump and politics is another big topic. And then there is more here. So this is how the graph representation works. And this is really like the main tool that you can use inside InfraNodus for analyzing any text. Just looking into this graph, scanning it, trying to see some interesting patterns inside, analyzing connections, and so on. So that would be the first thing. Just play around with the graph, click a few nodes, see which ones they're connected to, how they're aligned together. This will already give you a really good representation of the main ideas inside the discourse. And you will also be able to see the gaps. So for example, you will visually identify that maybe there is a gap here in between these two topics. So that will be later confirmed by a more precise analysis. You might also be interested in going beyond the periphery. So in that case, you can zoom into one topic that you find relevant. So for example, here he's talking about manufacturing, and then you can think what would happen if you go beyond this periphery, kind of extend this topic further. So this is really good to use the graph as a way to kind of understand any text and then identify the gaps inside. Then what are the other components of this interface? So first of all, with the graph itself, what you can do, and that's a very typical thing that power users do with InfraNodus, is when you select the nodes, like for instance here, AI and Trump, I'm going to select this too. Let's say I understand that he's talking a lot about AI and he's talking a lot about Trump. If I know his account, I would know that. And then I can select those nodes and then I can temporarily hide them from the graph. So this is a really powerful feature that you don't have in other graph tools. This ability to actually hide the nodes and to see what's hiding behind them, because the moment you hide them, everything is recalculated and you see the new clusters emerging. right? So there you can actually do it in a few iterations. You see that he's talking a lot about open source models. Once you get that, you select those nodes, you hide them, you see what's hiding behind. He's talking also about years, how many years something takes, or something about next year. So there's like a lot of reference to time. It seems to be an interesting subject for him. We can also remove that, see what else is hiding behind. Okay, we see that he's talking about his company, Meta, Llama. All right, we understand that. Hide this. We see there's a lot about research, but research seems to be a topic that connects a lot of different ones. How do we know that? Because it's this yellow node and we have topics shown with the specific colors here, right? But it connects to a lot of different other topics because it kind of exists also next to this green one, light green one, and so on. So we see that he's connecting the topic of research to LLMs, to work, and so on. So that could be an interesting insight for us. And then here we have another one on politics. So more specific stuff on inflation, American economy, growth, manufacturing, and so on. So there we kind of get the idea. And if we want to get all those hidden nodes back into the graph, then we just click this button here, and then it will return them back, recalculate everything, and you have the graph as it was at the beginning. By the way, if you ever want to do this in a way that's more automatic, you can just click this button here, and it's gonna cut off the top influential concepts, which are listed here. That's in the analytics panel, main ideas. It just automatically selects those concepts and removes them step by step. So you can do it in a few iterations, and then usually by the fifth or sixth iteration, you will get to quite interesting hidden topic and insights here. So that could be also something interesting for you for your workflow. If you just want to analyze the text, see what's hiding underneath, get the surface structure, and then kind of go deeper and deeper. So that would be the approach to use here. Another thing that you can do is once you see that, okay, these are the main topics, you also see them here, main ideas, AI frontier, Trump reality, and so on. So actually these names are generated by the built-in AI. And if you want to show them on the graph, you can click this button, high-level ideas. So you will see kind of high-level interpretations of those topical clusters, which are identified in the graph. So you see what the text is about. You see that it's about AI frontier, Trump reality, but also economic growth, India talks. So there's something on India, LLM release, tax policy, which is close to politics, also in space. So that means that he's using them in the same context, media dynamics, and so on. So that can be interesting for you if you want to get a high-level overview of ideas. If you don't want to get into this technical interface, you can also just click on AI Insights, and here you have a simplified view where you see the main topics here, but just the names for those topics that were generated by AI. AI generated summary for the whole text. So you see that he's talking about AI advancements, economic insights, and political commentary on Trump. And then also automatically generates already a question to explore that's based on a structural gap identified. So this AI Insights panel is really like the gist of all the insights that you can get from analytics. So if you don't like to go into details, you can just use this AI Insight, and that will give you an overview of the main ideas. Let's say you got the main ideas and now you want to jump to the blind spots in the discourse. So then you click here. And in fact, we kind of show them 1, 2, 3 step by step, so you can also understand how to follow analysis, right? And have a certain workflow there. And here you have the blind spots, and the blind spots are identified based on the gaps between the main topics in the discourse. So for example, here it identifies there's a gap between what he was talking about on economic growth and some talks in India, lecture, and so on. So you see, they are not so well connected here because they live and exist on the opposite sides of the graph. It means that there are not so many words that connect them together. So perhaps it could be interesting to link them, and this is what InfraNodus is proposing to you. Look at the structural gap, and then think of an insight question. So usually you would click here, and then the built-in AI would generate a research question that would link those two topics together. Here, for instance, it proposes how does the discourse surrounding OpenAI and technology investments intersect with India's role in global manufacturing growth and inflation trends as seen through the lens of distinguished lectures and talks at institutions like Madras. So probably like an interesting question to see how all these specific talks about how AI is going to impact economic growth can link to the situation, the economic developments, and also the intellectual developments in India. And usually that will be not such evident connections, and this is why they're interesting, because it's trying to connect things that are not yet connected. So this is where it can be useful. And if you like, you can then ask the system to show you another gap. So you would click on that button here, and then it would reiterate through all the topics. And then usually you want to look at the ones that are further apart from each other and kind of identify the gaps based on that, and then click that button to generate those insight questions. If you would like to reset everything, you can click here, or you can also go to reset highlight here. So you have these two ways to reset everything, either this reset button or the reset button here. And then if you want to switch off the names of the topics from the graph, then you click here. So that would be kind of like how you identify the gaps and then come back to the original graph view where you have the main ideas. Also, a very interesting part of the blind spots tab in the analytics panel are the conceptual gateways. And conceptual gateways is something a bit conceptual in itself, but I'll explain how it works in a simple way. Like imagine that there are some words that have high influence. So the analogy I like to give is that words are like social network. The words that appear often between different groups that will have higher influence. So this is why we have AI and Trump bigger here, because he's using them in a lot of different tweets, and he's kind of like connecting everything to those two topics. He's clearly interested in AI, but also in politics, and specifically in Trump, maybe because he doesn't like him and he's afraid of his influence on the economy. I don't know. But these are kind of evident stuff if you know what he's writing about. So conceptual gateways is a much more specific way to identify which words have high influence per a very few connections. And the analogy with the social networks would be, what would be the people that know not so many people, but the people they know are very important. And these are usually very good entrance points into the discourse because they're not overloaded by informational flows. Like, let's say if we wanted to talk to Jan and we came to him and we were like, yeah, we know you're interested in AI and Trump. Well, it's kind of obvious. So he would maybe feel that we're a bit too generic with our approach. So instead, we want to find the words that are influential in his discourse because they connect a lot of different topics together, but they have a high influence per the number of connections they have. And in that case, for instance, we see that there is one on manufacturing here, research, India, platform, and post. Post is maybe not so relevant, but for example, platform, India, manufacturing and research are quite interesting because we would know like, okay, so he's interested in manufacturing, he's interested in India. Maybe if we come up to him and we talk about some possibilities for investment in manufacturing in India and how AI can influence it and improve the situation, lead to some interesting economical developments, then maybe it will be something that will not be so evident, but somehow help us connect to his discourse. Or on the opposite, if we were him, we could also use those conceptual gateways in order to see how we can connect this discourse to some other discourses. So for example, talk about economical development in Asian countries here, if we go from India and kind of develop it further from here, or how we can take manufacturing and kind of like develop this idea further, maybe manufacturing chips or how AI can be used in manufacturing and so on. Right, so that would be the way how we would use those conceptual gateways. And this is really powerful way to kind of get to the insights in text that everyone else is missing. And I encourage you to use it. And I usually like to save them to notes here. And that's another feature of InfraNodus. If you find some interesting insights, you can always click Save to Notes, or you can also open project notes and save them here. And then you would kind of save some of the ideas here. And if you like what you see here, you can also ask it to generate a research question based on those conceptual gateways. And then usually AI will try to come up with some interesting question, which you can then use to motivate yourself to think about a certain topic. Or you can also ask it to generate an idea, and then it will come up with an idea for you. So this is how those conceptual gateways work. And you can use them both for research and to also generate some new business ideas. Then you have a tab that is called Relations, and this is useful for seeing connections between specific terms. So for example, now I'm going to reset the graph, so we remove all the selections here. In fact, I have to go here and do reset highlights, and then I go back to Relations. And then let's say I want to see what is connected to India in that case, right? I select India. Already on the graph I see what else it's connected to, but here I have a list of all the terms and their relative influence. So that can be interesting if you would like to be a bit more precise and, for example, see that, okay, what is he saying about Madras in India? And if I click on Madras in India, on the left, I will have filtered the statements that contain Madras in India. So for example, here he's referring to an interview with the Times of India following my talk at IT Madras yesterday in my keynote. So he talked at Madras and he's linking to his presentation there. So that's kind of like how that works. Okay, now if you wanted to look at sentiment, you can also do this. Then you go to sentiment and you try to just analyze it based on a standard model that works for English. If you would like a more advanced version of this model, you can use the BERT AI model, but usually that takes some time to start up. So it might take usually a moment, but basically it's more precise and it also works for other languages. And here we see that quite a lot of his tweets are identified as negative and a little bit less as positive. And if we click on the negative here, what happens is that the statements on the left are filtered, so only the negative ones are shown, and we see, oh, he's actually being negative when he talks about Trump, so probably he doesn't like the guy. And if we click on negative again, it's going to reset. Let's click on positive. Oh, he's positive when he's talking about AI. Surprise. And that's how you would also analyze very quickly, you know, what the sentiment is, but not just saying like that 53% of his tweets are negative, but you actually see what he's talking about, which is pretty cool. And you can see in which connections are he's talking about when he's talking about negative stuff, right? So you can quickly see that he doesn't like Trump and his economical policy. All right, so we go back here, we reset the sentiment. Then for the data nerds, you have the stats panel here where you can get a lot of information about the different types of metrics here, and you can also filter nodes by their frequency if you would like to do that, by between centrality, which is a default measure we use to identify the size, degree, if you know network science, this is the number of connections it has, and then some other measures that we have described in the help portal. So if you would like to know, for example, which nodes have the highest relation between the centrality to connections, that will be the nodes with the highest diversity, for example. It's the ones that I showed in the conceptual clusters one. But in the conceptual nodes here, we actually exclude the most relevant nodes, because they will be obviously the ones that have the highest between the centrality per degree. So here you would see kind of like all of them listed as well. So that would be a way to see those. And then here you have a switch also from basic mode to advanced mode. So if you click that, you will see two more tabs in the analytics panel. One will be trends, so you can see how a topic evolved over time. And as we can see, he's basically has been talking about AI and Trump all the time. It's just that the discourse kind of grew around it over and over again. So it wasn't like he talked about AI first and then Trump. He's been talking about both AI and Trump throughout the whole discourse. So it's quite useful, this feature, to understand how the discourse evolved over time. And then structure is something quite complex, but it has all the explanations here. I'm not going to go into detail now, but what I can say is that it's quite useful for analyzing how the discourse evolved over time, because here it shows you what was the frequency of the most influential words. And for example, you might notice that for some discourses, here he's actually been using the most influential ones almost all the time, but you might have some instances where somebody starts from less influential and goes to more influential. So that would give you an idea that, in fact, the more relevant terms to this discourse were mentioned towards the end, for example. So that would be how you would use it. But there are also many other applications of this, and you can read about it if you click on the question mark next to each of them. So that would be the analytics panel. I also want to show you the statements panel because that's quite interesting. Like you have the statements here, but you also have the filters, and you can actually filter the statements by whatever tags you would like to use. When you import data, InfraNodus adds some tags for you. So for example, here it says, what are the tweets with the most retweets? Like, let's say we want to see the tweets that had more than 1,000 retweets. So we can click here and we see that, oh, his tweets about Trump are actually retweeted the most, it looks like. And then let's see, less retweets for his AI stuff. I wonder if he would be happy with this, that he's an AI researcher, but in fact, his complaints about Trump is what gets retweeted the most. And I'm not sure how he would feel about that. But InfraNodus allows you to see this very quickly, you see. And for example, favorites, let's see. Well, in fact, favorites are kind of equal between topics, even a bit more for AI. Let's see, a bit less favorites. Okay, Trump. So he's kind of partaking in this polarization game. It looks like, because when he's talking about Trump, it gets retweeted the most, and it kind of gets the same number of likes from the people who probably share his hatred for Trump. So that would be, you know, how we could interpret this data. But this kind of text you can use for anything. So if you import, for instance, several Google searches into InfraNodus, you can also filter later by the different imports that you did. So that's quite useful if you want to see the different parts of the data that you added into your system and so on. So I encourage you to use this feature. It's pretty useful when you want to get like to more detailed analysis. What else I can show? Here you have something that might change alignment. So if you want it in a circle, you can do that. This is the 4 Southwest layout I mentioned earlier that works by pushing the most connected words apart from each other and then connecting them to the words that they link to next to them. So that would be how that works. And then you can change the theme, light, dark here. I prefer dark. And then you have some additional settings about display. So for example, you can manipulate how the graph looks if you show the nodes, if they're big or not. Also, if you want to show only the most connected ones. And you can even filter the time range of the tweets here in a more precise way. So you can see how the discourse evolved a bit more precisely. As you can see, there was a moment when he was talking more about AI, then Trump, then back to AI. So you have this kind of additional parameters for filtering here. These are the zoom buttons. This is a tutorial that kind of walks you through a little bit. And also you have a much more advanced tutorial here in the top right corner that shows you the text exploration workflow. So it's kind of like the 5 basic steps you need to make in order to get an idea about this text and to identify the structural gaps inside. So that would be the workflow here, and you can actually mark it as completed and then ask the system to show you what it's doing so that you can understand how you could do this yourself. And once you understand, you can mark it as complete and then ask it to show you the next stuff. So for example, here you see it's showing you how structural gaps work, and it's actually highlighting what happens when you select them. Then when you go to here, you reset the highlight, reset the graph, remove the topic clusters and so on. So that would be the analytics panel, the statements, which we just looked at, the graph, and the menu on the right for the graph. We also have the menu on the left, so that would be interesting here if you would like to hide the statements. This menu changes depending on where you are. If you would like to import more search results from Twitter, you can just add a search query here and it will do it for you. Or you can also add text manually, or you can import it from many other sources. So for example, I could add some Google search results into this graph by choosing that, right? So that is a panel that you can use to import stuff, add, import, as you can see here. Here is something that could be useful for you if you would like to understand or to analyze the text in a slightly different way. So for example, if you're using a language other than English, make sure you have your language set up here, because automatic is by default. But if you're, for example, analyzing something in German, it makes sense to choose German also here. Otherwise, I always keep it at the language I'm using. And then you have some advanced settings that allow you to control how the text is processed in more detail. So if you're using something like WikiLinks syntax, for instance, or mentions, you can actually specify how you would like them to be processed here. And you can also choose to lemmatize hashtags and entities in WikiLinks, because by default they're not lemmatized, they're kept as they are, but you might choose to lemmatize them, or you can even ask not to lemmatize, and that means that all the words in your graph will be shown, even if, for example, you're using opened and open. Now it's one word because they're all lemmatized, brought to the original form, but in this case it would be two different words. So that's how it would work if you would like to do the lemmatization analysis. And here you can also specify the stop words, so the words that you would like to hide. So for example, if I decide that, okay, I don't want the word like AI and Trump here, I can actually just type this here, and then when the graph is saved and reloaded, they will be considered as stop words for this graph, so they will not be shown anymore here. And you can actually add your own custom lists of stop words. So as you can see now, AI and Trump are not shown. I'm gonna get them back. So that's kind of like for you to have more control over how things are visualized. This is the panel here. This one shows you how the text evolved over time also. So that would be kind of like a navigation of the graph. And what you can do is activate, and then you scroll through the statements, and the statements you see are highlighted on the graph. So that can also be pretty useful for time analysis. And you can also press play, and then it's going to kind of scroll them for you, so you can observe how it evolves over time. Can also be pretty interesting. All right, so that would be this one. Then you can also share your graph here. So you have to actually make it first public, and then you have to then get the link for it, or the iframe embed code. You can also download it as image, or you can tweet it. And then you can also download all the data in any format you want, whether it's a graph or text, and then save the version that you're currently viewing, delete the graph, make it favorite. This I like with the graphs that I enjoy. And here you can actually turn on voice recognition, so you speak and your text is visualized as a graph. Then you have the AI panel here, which you can use to generate ideas based on the structure of the graph. So for example, you can, get the advice from the system which clusters should be connected, and then either question them, have a chat with them, challenge the connection, make an assertion, generate an idea, or simply Google something. So for example, Googling something could be, if you want to, let's say, choose inflation in America, if you Google it, it's just going to Google inflation in America. So that can be pretty useful if you want to look something up. But normally how I like to use it is, of course, for the AI stuff. So if I say, okay, Meta, Llama, Open AI, I can ask it in the chat mode to generate a statement that would relate to those 4 nodes, and it will do this for me. So this is how the AI generation would work on this selection process. All right. Also, if you would like a free chat, you can do it here. So you can just ask any question, and you can say, what is this about, for instance, and then derive from this context. It means it will use this very context you're analyzing to give you an answer to this question, right? But you could also say, okay, I actually would like to ask a more general question that doesn't relate to this graph, and then you switch this off, derive from this context off, and then it's just going to generate like a more general response that doesn't have to root in the text that you're analyzing. One other thing that I want to show you is that if you generate a question, for example, based on the gap using the AI module, you can click on elaborate, and then you can kind of add a meta prompt to this original question. So by default, it's elaborate on the statement, but for example, I could ask, how could you challenge this? and then it will relate to this question that we generated, derived from this context, and then I click chat, and then it's going to answer to me and try to explain how it's going to challenge this very question that it generated. So that can be pretty interesting if you would like to sort of play around with this back and forth with AI and to generate some interesting ideas there. So that's the module for AI use. And as I mentioned before, if you would like to save some notes, you save them here. You can also just write something, some insights that you discovered, click save, and they're saved. And then once you made enough notes, you can even generate an outline of an article that you could write based on those notes. So that's pretty handy if you like to create content, for instance. So that's it in a nutshell about the InfraNodus interface. You also have the search here, which you can search visible graph, the whole text, or all the graphs, so the top graphs in your system. So that would be something to use if you would like to search. I'll make another video on the search function later. And then here you have all your graphs listed and also some import features. I'll make a separate video about how you can import stuff, but in general you can paste an existing text, upload files here, or you can use existing sources like Google, Twitter. Also, I like to use suggested search queries, so that's in the related search queries, YouTube video comments, so you can basically analyze almost any text and build the same graph from them. I hope you find this walkthrough useful. I'll make another video on the recommended workflows where it will be more simplified, but a lot of people asked me to record something where I would just guide them through the whole interface of InfraNodus. So here we go. And if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments to this video and I will be happy to answer. Thank you.